Hello and welcome to episode 42 of React Native Radio. I'm your host, Nader Dabbit. Today on our panel, we have Kevin Old.
Hello.
Ali Najafizadeh.
Hello, guys.
And today our special guest is Tom Goldenberg. Hello, Tom. Welcome to the show.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for coming on. Yeah, so I guess to get everything kicked off, can you kind of go into how you got into programming in general and then kind of what drew you to React Native?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my story is a little unique. I only got into programming a year and a half ago. I went to one of these boot camps and, I got the fundamentals of JavaScript, but I immediately, just from talking to people in the field, I was drawn into React. And, at the time, Angular was kind of like the hot thing, but I couldn't help it. I went down that route, and every job that I've gotten after that has been using React and React Native. So that was just a natural progression, I had to say.
Wow, that is amazing. So like within a year and a half, you've already gone from like being a beginner to like having multiple job opportunities, I guess.
Oh yeah, it's been, I work my ass off for sure, but like a month ago, I was asked to present at the United Nations for, one of this open camp presentation at the UN. And yeah, I think that's amazing that I've been able to have these opportunities in such a short time.
So what were you doing before you got into this?
So interesting kind of story. I actually lived in India for 9 years. It was kind of one of those things when I was like 20 years old. It's like, this would be really awesome to do. And I went there. I was there during the tsunami and was able to help out during those relief efforts. And I ended up, really falling in love with the place. I learned the languages and became a language instructor there.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, well, that's so cool to hear that. So, like, I want to know, like, from the time you finished first of all, what boot camp did you go to?
I went to Dev Boot Camp in New York City. It's definitely focused on, like, Ruby and Rails and JavaScript at the time. I mean, the curriculum a lot of these places is always changing. But, I knew just through going through it that JavaScript, is the future. Just through like going to meetups and talking to people in the field, I thought it was like the most exciting place in web development at the time. And that's what led me into React and Meteor as well.
So like, I guess when you finished your time at the boot camp, like how hard was it to get employment? I guess like just find a real job.
It was actually, I'm not going to lie, it was a challenge. I think there's like a lot of preconceptions about bootcamp grads that, they don't understand computer science fundamentals. They're not good programmers. And so I had to overcome a lot of those stereotypes that some employers have. I wasn't able to find jobs through just, blanket sending out my resume. Instead, what I did is I took a different approach. I went to, at the time, Meteor meetup in New York City, and I asked if I could give a 10-minute lightning talk. And just through giving that lightning talk, that 10 minutes, I got so many job leads and people reaching out to me for interviews. It was just amazing.
So, like, how far into your graduation until you gave that talk would you say how much time had lapsed between those two points in your life?
Yeah, so I actually graduated from Dev Boot Camp in late July of 2015. I immediately got married. It wasn't a rash decision. I had planned it out, and then I had about a month to find a job. So it was after about like 2 to 3 weeks after the traditional job search that I took this different approach, and it ended up landing me a lot of interviews with companies and my first couple jobs too.
So were you like a front-end developer in your first position, and were you using React, or were you kind of doing more back-end Rails type of stuff?
So I really loved React when I was in my training and learning about web development. The first job I got was for a small company using Meteor. And at the time, they weren't using React. And, I came in and I said, I think you guys can really organize your code a lot better, switching out Blaze for React. And they let me do that, and it turned out to be a good opportunity.
Yeah, so I'm interested, about the companies that are giving you a chance. I think that's a huge thing that we don't need to miss in this. I know that I've worked for companies that are reluctant to hire new talent. Can you talk about some of those companies and what, were they startups? Were you paid fair wages? Like, can you talk about some of that, some of the specifics?
Absolutely. Yeah. All the companies that I've worked for have been kind of, early stage startups. And I think those are sometimes the best opportunities to get in, because in the larger companies, a lot of times what they're looking for, they don't necessarily, you don't need to know the language that you're going to be coding in. You don't need to know the exact frameworks or tools you're going to be using. They just want to test that, you have a good, solid, fundamental understanding of algorithms and data structures and stuff. But on the other hand, startups, they want you to hit the ground running. They're really concerned with, can you actually like come into here and be productive from day one? And that was what I was good at the time. I didn't have a really great, I couldn't tell you how to balance a B tree or, do depth first or breadth first search, but I knew how to code, and I knew how to use some of these tools that these particular startups were using. And that's what allowed me to get into those startups.
So did you have tight deadlines? Were you working a ton of hours, and do you think you were paid fairly?
Yeah. Yeah. I think people have like, every startup is different. And, I'm sure that does happen at some startups where they expect you to work like all the time. I'm the kind of person that, like my current job, for example, I work, about 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. And it's just like a regular 9 to 5. We're a small startup, but I'm the kind of person that outside of work, I'm still doing stuff. I'm not going to be, working on that product, but I'm always trying to learn something new. So in a sense, I do work a lot, but I've always been fairly compensated and lucky to work with very good managers. I will say that some startups, the downside that you face is sometimes can be really hectic. There was one startup that was going through an accelerator program, and they're trying to get funding, and it was stressful. And depending on who you're working for, they can deal with that in better ways or not. So I've seen everything. I'm with a 6-person startup right now, and it's great. Everything is treated very fairly, and I get to work on exciting things.
I think it speaks a lot to your work ethic, and your the type of, like, I'm sure you've put in a lot of work to get to the point where you were able to get hired so quickly, and you obviously didn't just sit there and send out resumes. But I also think it speaks very highly to the current state of like React Native, and the actual number of companies that are really looking for developers that are competent in those technologies. It's very encouraging, I guess, for new developers that are listening, that are looking to get employed, to kind of know that they've chosen, in my opinion, and based on a lot of people I've talked to, a really good stack to specialize in at this current time, where we are right now. It could change in a year or two, who knows? But right now, if you are a competent React or React Native developer, it is not very tough to, get a job if you do the right things. And I think you've done the right things. But like, if you were to talk to someone who just finished a dev boot camp, or maybe someone that was working in a different stack and is trying to move over to the front end, what would you tell them to have, similar success in a similar amount of time, I guess?
Having interesting side projects is always like really helpful. And one thing I just want to just make a point of what you just said. I do feel that choosing what language you focus on and what technologies you focus on is important, in addition to understanding all these fundamental stuff, because it's really like an investment. Where you're making an investment in your future. And one of the things I went through and going through coding boot camp was like, Ruby is great. I love Ruby. It's like very elegant and easy to code. But, I looked at the scene, I look at the situation, and it's like, that's really not how I want to invest my career. I want to invest it in things that are like going to continue to grow. And yeah, I do agree with you. Like React Native are here to stay. So, people are looking for developers that are experienced in this. And especially with startups, like as long as you have some projects that, you can showcase in your portfolio, that speaks volumes. Like if I had a startup and I'm trying to hire someone, I'd want to see their code. I get people on LinkedIn sometimes, these recruiters, and they're like, we're looking for someone with 6 years of React experience. I'm like, what? Like React is not even, it's not that old. So for me, that's what I would value.
I have a question from you. It's kind of like I've been coding for almost, 7, 8 years. And it's kind of like I lost the basic. What I mean is if somebody wants to start learning React, how many hours or how many time he needs to spend on the JavaScript to fully understand the JavaScript before jumps into the React? Like, does he needs to know a lot of things about the JavaScript, or it's okay if it jumps into the React? I'm sorry, I'm asking this question because I'm kind of like I become so used to JavaScript that I don't know whether I'm actually doing a React or JavaScript. You know what I mean? So how many hours did you actually spend on just the JavaScript itself before you fully understand the React?
I mean, so in preparation to the bootcamp that I went to, I definitely found whatever books were recommended on JavaScript. So I think JavaScript, the good parts, and I think there's one called Essential JavaScript, Object-Oriented JavaScript. I did read all these books, so I definitely think that it helps. And especially now, like when I was first learning React, it was kind of right before all the ES6 took over. It was like a couple months before that. And I wonder if someone is jumping into this for the first time, how much the different ways and different flavors of syntax can throw people off. I mean, I personally love coding with it. I think it's amazing. But for newcomers, like, wait, I do function, parentheses, curly brackets, and you did something different. You just did the curly brackets and this fat arrow. I don't understand what's going on. So, I'd have to talk to more people to see how much. I do think that you should kind of understand some fundamentals of the language for sure.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
So you're pretty heavily involved with the React Native community in New York. Can you kind of talk about how you got involved with the React Native community there and what companies are doing with React Native and why you feel like it's a good place to invest your time?
Sure, absolutely. I got involved in React Native really through a job. I was a friend of a friend knew that I used React, and he had a startup that was going through an accelerator, and they wanted to use React Native. So I said, hey, I know React. This is something that I can learn. And, we were part of the small team, and we had so many questions about React Native back then. This would have been like a year ago from now. And at the time, like even still React Native is always changing, but it was sometimes hard to get, answers to our questions. And so more out of like selfish reasons than anything was like, let's just start a meetup so that we can meet other people that are using this. And so me, a buddy, Harry, who I worked with, and a friend, Nick, who was a product manager at another company, we started this meetup in New York City, React Native NYC. And it's really grown. We had the first meetup at Priceline. Our next meetup, American Express is interested. We've had eBay, Oscar Health, who has used React Native. And through going to all these meetups and organizing these meetups, I've gotten to meet people at a whole range of different companies, from kind of like side project, do it yourself, deploy an app on the App Store, to, delivery.com, Oscar Health, billion-dollar companies that are using React Native in production. It's really encouraging to see as it goes on, the larger and more mature companies are starting to hop on this bandwagon.
So what kind of growth have you seen at your meetup, and like what type of turnout are you having there?
Sure. So the first meetup we had like 30 or 40 people, and that was in November of last year. And we host a meetup every other month or so, and our next meetup is, like I said, at American Express for more than 200 people. So it's definitely grown. I still want to keep that like kind of personal feel of a smaller meetup where people that are just in the community and, hey, I built this app and for my iPhone, I want to showcase it. I still want to have that. So we're trying to find the right balance between showcasing the larger companies with also independent developers too.
So I hold a couple of meetups, and I've found it pretty tough to find that balance of not too many meetups to where people get kind of exhausted, and then a little bit bored, and you get tired too from doing all this stuff, and then not having enough meetups. So do you feel like one meetup every other month seems to be like a pretty good balance?
It's definitely enough time to get really good speakers, which is, like for me, I think the speakers come first. Like, you don't just like automatically host a meetup at a certain time if you're not able to get good speakers. And, we've had really excellent talks in the past couple meetups. We had a talk on using Relay with React Native the last one, a talk from delivery.com on like how they've built a cross-platform app for their Android app. And so stuff that like you honestly don't get to hear about otherwise. So I think we have pretty good balance.
So do you have a sponsor that rotates, or do you have a stable sponsor that hosts your meetups?
What we have done so far is kind of switch it up from meetup to meetup. And part of that is that there's just a lot of companies that are interested in, having a meetup at their company. So we have had great venues. eBay was a great venue. Oscar Health was a great venue. But then as soon as you host it somewhere, you get another great venue too that's like, hey, we want to host you here. And the reason we went with Amex was we're having size issues. So, eBay, we could fit maybe 100 people, but we had to put, 50 people on the wait list. So I'm curious to see how it goes moving from like the smaller size meetup to, 200 plus on the RSVPs.
That's like a conference.
Yeah. But I mean, think about it. You get to meet so many people. That's the benefit of it. And
no,
we don't
great.
just we don't just do talks. Like I've been to some meetups in the city where it's just you go in, you sit down, you listen to two people talk, and then you leave. And that's not what a meetup is about for me. Like, I try to like everyone that comes in, if it's their first time, we ask them like, hey, what brought you here? Why are you using React Native? What are you guys doing? And I think that all of us that are, part of the meetup, we come every time because we want to talk to people that are using this and kind of share our war stories and, the struggles we're going through.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love attending meetups, and I love holding meetups. And I think it's so cool. Like, see, I live in Mississippi. We don't have a ton of people that show up. We have a very good, solid number of people that show up every time, but we never peak above 35, 40 people. And we're a very general meetup. I would like to do a React Native meetup, but we just don't have that critical mass here yet. So it's really interesting to hear how that type of thing goes in larger cities. I know the one in San Francisco is extremely, it just sells out or whatever. It just fills out very quickly every time. So I'm not surprised to hear that the one in New York is getting very large and very popular. So I'll be interested to hear how it goes, at American Express and having 200 people there. It seems pretty cool.
Yeah, we're having our next event, just a little PR. We're having a Shout 'em. Have you guys heard of Shout 'em?
Yeah, we had them on about a month ago, I think.
Yeah, so they I guess they provide like, kind of a UI, make the UI very easy to do with React Native. So I'm curious. They're going to give a presentation. We also have somebody from Flare by GoDaddy was built with React Native, and that's Connor McEwen, and he's going to talk about that. I'm also going to be talking to. So I'm going to talk about this tutorial that I made and the process of making it, as well as kind of tips for getting started.
So if someone wants to RSVP or if they want to become part of the meetup, they just go to meetup.com and search for React Native New York, I guess.
React Native NYC. Yep.
Okay, cool. So about the tutorial, that's kind of one of the main reasons we brought you on today. Also to hear about how you became, into React Native and all this stuff. Can you talk about the tutorial / book that you put together and just kind of give us some information about what it is and why people might be interested in it?
Yeah, sure. So as I said, my first job using React Native was about a year ago. And it was such an empowering thing to be able to use JavaScript to build mobile apps. And so me and a friend of mine, Nick Brown, he was a product manager at Huge, he still is. We decided to, take up some side project where we can build an iOS and an Android app. And we decided to build an app on the Bhagavad Gita, which is an Indian text. And through that process, we had a lot of fun. We learned a lot. But we were also like, there was not a ton of resources and documentation online. So we decided to build this tutorial. It's at buildreactnative.com. And the idea behind it was we wanted to make a non-trivial app. Like what I find a lot of tutorials do is, you make a chat app, or you make like a blog app, like a Hacker News clone or something. And those apps, while they're very instructional, they don't really give you the feeling of having accomplished something really complex. So we took, instead of a Hacker News clone, we took Meetup. And, Meetup has a lot of complex things to it. It has, you have to be able to message other users. You have to be able to create events, RSVP events. You have calendar integration, map integration. And so that's what we went with, a Meetup clone called Assemblies. And we used Deployed, which is, a simple Mongo API server to use as the backend. And, it's been out for about a month and a half, and we've had people are saying really good things about it. So it definitely feels like a proud thing to do.
Is this your first venture into writing, or have you written other books or tutorials before?
So I haven't written any books before. I've always kind of enjoyed writing, and as I said, I used to teach languages. So I definitely I like language. I love to read myself. And I guess what kind of drew me into it originally, after I got out of boot camp, I started writing blog posts, and I found that there was an audience for it. And, some of them, some people really, it really resonated with them. So since then I've kind of found a voice, I guess you could say. I like to blog. I like to do technical blogs for sure. And those kind of come pretty naturally, but I also like to blog about, just, experiences that I have. So I wrote about what it was like, kind of facing, as we said, some discrimination against bootcamp graduates and what that's like. I also wrote about, interviewing at Google. I had an on-site interview at Google a couple months ago, and I wrote about the experience of going through that and getting rejected. And it's something that I definitely enjoy. And the tutorial, it was a good opportunity to really go into that. I do think there's this thing where you can be a real expert in something. It doesn't mean that you can teach it. There's really two different skills between being able to do something really well and to be able to explain it in simple terms. So that's what I try to do. I want it to be really easy for people to understand.
As someone who's also kind of writing about React Native right now, I've run into some issues because of how rapidly it's evolving and how resource intensive it is to kind of create good content around React Native. What have you seen as far as API changes since you've begun writing this book? And also, how have you dealt with those?
So a couple decisions helped to make this a little bit better. The first is the content in making an ebook makes it a little bit easier because we're able to update it every couple months or so and not be so painful. A video tutorial is a little more difficult because then what are you going to do? You're going to record everything or add snippets and stuff. And again, in the process of making this ebook, we use Gitbook, which I don't know if you guys have used, but it's been really, really great. Like, just provides a great editor and way of, making changes. And so we'll get, requests from people that are using the book and say, hey, I think you spelled this wrong or whatever. And it's just a matter of going to Gitbook and saving the changes. And what we do is on the web app, we use Meteor, and we just, we have a separate repo for the markdown that Gitbook produces. And we just, bring that into the repo for each chapter. So that having that setup itself provides a great way to change the content when necessary. And like that has been necessary. As for like some of the frustrations with the API changes, we've definitely faced that. One, with Navigator has been kind of an ever changing thing. When it first came out, it was okay to use Navigator iOS, and that's what I used for the first iOS app we made. And then, Navigator was the solution. And then, as more people started to use Redux, they wanted a more Redux compatible Navigator. So now we have Navigation Experimental. And I'm hearing that, React Native Router Flux, I think is another one that people are using now. So navigation is definitely one that's like, it's hard to kind of like say in a chapter, like, this is definitely what you should use. We did take the decision to use Navigator in the examples that we did because, it was the most kind of like stable. And I still feel that it is, but I have used Navigator Experimental and I think it's great, but it is evolving.
I do have one question, but it's just going back to your meetup. Usually what I found to be very interesting, also valuable, is the slides and the talk that people actually presented during these meetup. I actually learned a lot because I can't be in San Francisco or New York every time there is a good meetup. So do you have any plans, or are you actually uploading the slides or videos of those meetups that are very interesting so people can actually start watching it wherever they are?
Sure. So some of it depends on the presenter. A lot of our presenters will share their slideshows through the meetup page or on Twitter or both. I've tried to make an effort to start video recording the presentations. Part of that, I just purchased a cheap kind of phone stand where you can just kind of keep your phone steady and just hit record. So I'm going to try that at the next one. We'll see how it goes. At the last one for delivery.com, I tried to just hold it in my hand and record, and it ended up it just felt like it was an earthquake. So I'm going to try to improve upon that.
Yeah, that's a good question, Ali. And it's something that I've had to think about as well. And what we've kind of done is we bought a GoPro camera, and it's like probably the least technologically savvy way of recording meetups, but it gets the job done for now until we get either more money or more resources to actually get more professional, recording equipment. And it is time intensive. And if you don't really, we have so much stuff going on to actually do that. It's definitely something that needs to be done, and it's always on the top of my head. But actually getting it done is another story. But I used to go to this meetup in LA called JS.LA, and they have like conference quality recordings done at every meetup, and it's awesome. I've always aspired to be as good as they have done because, like you said, it's a shame to have all this great content and then not be able to share it with the world, pretty much.
Yeah, and I kind of feel that way. We had a meetup a month ago on Relay with React Native, and at the time I was like, oh, Relay. I wasn't really that interested in GraphQL at the time, and after that meetup, I'm like, wow, this is something that I need to explore and get into. And so I wish I had again, for selfish reasons, I wish I had a copy of that. It was by Neville from Pathfinder. He gave a great talk.
So switching back to the tutorial. So you mentioned that the backend, could you talk a little bit about the backend that you're using? Is it something that someone that doesn't have any back-end experience would need to be familiar with before they could take advantage of the React Native tutorial?
Sure. I would say that you don't really need back-end experience to do the tutorial at all. And in my professional experience with React Native, I've generally, I was an experience where using Meteor as a backend, and Meteor works great with React Native, especially for like real-time chat messaging and stuff like that. But when we were designing this tutorial, we did want to focus on just on React Native, on the core technology, and to do that, we looked at different ways of doing that, and DPD or deployed turned out to be a great option. Basically, you do DPD create. It's got its own command line interface, and it will just create a node server that runs a Mongo database. And also it has a GUI. It has a graphical user interface. You just go to, localhost 8080 at dashboard, and you can see all the collections you have. Comes with user authentication already baked in. And it was great. Because we did that, I think, without having a solution like that, it would be really hard to build, a meetup clone in an entire tutorial. So I definitely recommend checking it out. It's really good for prototyping stuff.
Awesome. And so just to clarify, deployed is a open source package that you can install from NPM?
Right. So NPM install global, DEPLOYD deployed without the final E.
Got it. Okay. So it's not a hosted service like Firebase or something like that.
Right. Exactly.
Okay.
It's
It's for local.
And in the tutorial, we even show how to actually deploy it to, a DigitalOcean droplet. You can run it locally when you're developing it, but of course, if you want to deploy to the App Store, you have to deploy the API. So we also show how to do that.
So at the company you're currently working with, can you kind of talk about what you guys do there, and do you use React Native at your company at this moment?
Sure. So I work for a company, Agolo. We're at agolo.com. And what Agolo does is, we're a team of natural language processing and machine learning engineers, and we cluster large amounts of data, whether it's news articles or internal documents, and then we provide bullet point summaries on those data points. So that's what we do. I'm, in charge of the web app, essentially. So we're using Meteor with React and Redux on the front end, and we're exploring GraphQL as well at this point. We're just kind of coming out of the accelerator phase. We were in the Microsoft Machine Learning Accelerator. So we have plans to expand into, iPad and iPhone. But for right now, it's a responsive web app. So, the React, the React Native stuff comes more in my side projects that I do and in the community for the meetup.
So it looks like you guys have a developer portal at Agolo. What exactly can we do with that API?
Yeah, so Agolo, we're working on developing a couple different types of APIs. The main API that you see there is to use our summarization engine. So you can get an access token, and basically any URL or text file, or just text as JSON, you send it over, and our API can give, a bullet point summary of that item or multiple items as well. So it can also do multi-document summarization.
Oh, this is really cool. It reminds me a little bit of some of the stuff we've been working with the Watson API. We do some language processing, but it's more like analyzing the tone. I think it's a tone analyzer is what we're using, but I'm sure it's similar. Well, actually, what do you guys do to kind of to put this stuff into bullet points? Or do you really? Well, I know you don't really work on that end of the team, but do you have any insight about what they do?
Yeah, I mean, so we're a small team, so even though I am, the work on the web app, I still take part in a lot of these discussions. Our CTO, Mohammed, he was a PhD candidate at Columbia for specifically focusing on summarization in natural language processing. So the team, we have Mohammed, we have Prem, who's also from Colombia, and these guys are just amazing. We mainly work in Java for our summarizer, but using really state of the art algorithms for the natural language processing, as well as some of the more current open source libraries.
Do you guys have any other points that you want to cover, or Thomas, is there anything that you think that we haven't gone over that you want to talk about?
So in relation to Agolo and React Native, could you talk about any of the apps that you're building or the plans to build with this natural language processing interface? What would the app interface with that API and do for a consumer or a business?
So the API could be used for any kind of summarization need. What we're building as far as the actual web app, and we call it the portal, is mainly focused at this point towards the financial industry and people that are in charge of keeping tabs of certain trends or industries or companies. And what we allow you to do in the web app is you can input specific keywords related to Fortune 500 companies or whatever, self-driving cars, whatever it is that your company is in charge of. And we will cluster basically, hundreds of thousands of documents and provide those clusters as your newsfeed with the summary of those clusters. So, if you're following Facebook or Google, and you're in a venture fund or you're a financial analyst, you'll get to see up to date, not just the 10 kind of like the 10 blue links of like, okay, this is what's happening, but clustered with machine learning, here are the events and here is the summary. So really shortening the time it takes to do research on organizations and companies.
You've kind of been specializing recently in React Native, and you've written a lot of articles, and you have this book and all this. Can you kind of talk about why you personally feel that React Native is something? I know we kind of went over this earlier, but can you kind of talk about why you feel like it's something that someone should invest their time in now, and also why companies should use it, and where you feel like the mobile development landscape is headed over the next couple of years?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. As for React Native personally, there's multiple sides of it. I think, like, one, it's just fun. First of all, it's a fun experience to be able to build apps for your phone, for your friend's phone, and be able to do that. I think that's one of the downsides of web development is like, oh, you built a website, who cares, But everyone kind of craves to be able to like, oh, that's my app. There's the fun, which is a part of any framework and any technology, like, that makes you want to do it. As for like the business value, I think it has both. I think it's fun for developers to use. It's developer friendly. It's got a great development experience with the hot loading and everything that just speeds the development time, and just the smoothness of it too. Facebook has invested a lot in this, and the community has come in and invested a lot in this open source project. And so it's hard to tell between an iOS or a Java Android app and a native React in a React Native app. And because of that, my theory is this: if you are a large company and you have an existing code base in Swift or Objective-C or Java, I wouldn't recommend that you try to tear everything down and use React Native. That's not what it's for. But for startups coming into this game, you have to reach both markets. You need to have an Android app and an iOS app to compete. And I've talked to startup CEOs, and I think it's a big mistake to ignore this technology that can improve your iteration cycle, get feedback from customers, and improve your growth tremendously. I think it has tremendous business value for startups. And obviously not just startups, because we're talking to companies in New York City that they're a mid-sized company, but they don't have an Android app. And they're like, well, we like the ability of, being able to build out complex features on both platforms. So, let's just build the entire Android app in React Native and then eventually come to a cross-platform solution. So I think it really depends, if you're an independent developer, you're a startup, you're a mid-sized company, large company, it really depends on your business needs. But I think it would be foolish not to consider it.
Yeah, I agree. And to further your point about the complexity of building mobile apps, as far as doing native Android and native iOS, there was a really good talk by Tal Cole. He is the lead mobile architect at Wix.com. And they, I think, have something like 80 million users, I think he said in his talk, that use Wix. And they had a native app that they were running in their company. And it was only they only had one mobile app, but they have like 3 or 4 different products. So they wanted to build mobile apps for all their different products in their company. But in order to do so, they were going to need to hire 200 engineers per team, per platform, or something crazy like that. So he was talking about the cost that was going to come to the company had they gone the native route. And in the talk, which is actually going to be one of my picks, he is also talking about how it is getting more and more complex to build native apps and how React Native is solving that problem for these large companies, including Facebook. I mean, if Facebook is $1 billion company that has billions of dollars to blow on engineers, why are they, spending all this time and money and effort away from their core product to develop this if they are not feeling the same pain that everyone else is feeling? And I always, come back to the idea that, I may think I'm smart, and I may, have a good understanding about what's going on, but I seem to also heavily value people that I see as a lot smarter than me, that are kind of on a whole larger team of smart people. And if they've come to the conclusion, I definitely am going to value what they're doing more than my own opinion sometimes. So that's kind of my take on why I personally am a big fan.
I like that. That Facebook has $1 billion, so exactly. They could easily forget about it as a problem. It's a good point.
Yeah, so what I wanted to say is even if the company or a big corporation has an existing app in native, what they can do is they can incorporate React Native into their app, and then they can actually add a brand new feature. Like if they want to add a brand new feature and then try out the React Native, what they can do is they can add React Native into their existing app, and then start building a new feature with React Native. And that's the cool part of the React Native. So React Native means you don't need to actually rebuild everything from the scratch. You can add it slowly into your product and then slowly refactoring all the native code into React Native if you want to. But that's what we did with some code base, and it turns out to be really good.
Yeah, I would just add to that. One of the first presenters we had at our meetup was Delivery.com, and they were in the exact same situation. They had a code base, already existing, and they just built a small feature in React Native, which was the checkout. And they, with Code Push and everything, Microsoft's Code Push, they were able to publish updates on the fly and everything, and that can be a big thing, especially for something where the part of the app where people are paying money, right? Like if there's a bug, you want the update to go out really fast. And the management team saw that, and they're like, "This is great. Let's just build our Android app in it." So that's their story.
Yeah, I'd like to talk more about that, Ali. Maybe we can do an entire episode one day about. I know we did talk about this, but it's been at least a year, and I would like to hear a more up to date conversation about implementing a React Native project in an existing native project, but also taking a native project and then moving it to React Native. I think those would be really interesting conversations.
Yeah, sure, definitely. Yeah,
Here.
Kevin wants to say
Kevin.
something.
Yeah, sorry.
No, actually, I was going to say exactly, almost exactly what Ali said. I will add one thing in that I think that we're all, big companies and small companies, are just seeing the value of React Native and the fact that it gives you that instant feedback. You don't have to compile, and then you get the ability, just like Ali was saying, to try it out in a small feature in the existing app and ship it. There are few technologies that you can do something like that with on these platforms. So I'm just excited to see where it goes as we progress.
So Tom, if someone wants to kind of keep up with your blog and learn more about your book and just all this stuff, like, well, where can they reach you on social media? And we'll also make sure we link to all this stuff in our notes.
Yeah, absolutely. You can reach me on Twitter at Tom Goldenberg. It's Goldenberg. And it's the same on Medium too. That's where I generally I try to blog pretty regularly about React, about React Native and Meteor. And yeah, that's where you can find me.
Okay, great.
And of course the please check out the tutorial at buildreactnative.com, and definitely want to give a shout out to Agolo, and also a shout out to my wife Jess. I told her I was going to give a shout out today.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, we really enjoyed having you on. It's been super interesting to hear about, everything you just talked about. You seem extremely enthusiastic. You seem like very motivated and interested in React Native. So it was a really cool conversation.
Awesome. I thank you for having me on. It's always it's nice to talk about these things and get different insights.
Cool. Well, we'll definitely be reaching back out to you to discuss the meetup stuff. So everyone listening, you might hear Tom back on in a couple of weeks. So I guess we'll go ahead and jump to our picks. Kevin, do you have any picks?
Yeah, I do. First pick is it's actually a shout out to Exponent.js. They shipped version 10 of their SDK and 2.8, I believe, of their XDE, which is the development environment. And I was actually had a chance to use Exponent outside of just wanting a React Native app. I wanted to share a quick prototype this past week inside my company, because we were having some trouble. The business was having trouble seeing what the idea was. And so I said, well, you know what? I can throw something together very quickly and just get a visual, right? And I knew I could share it. And that was the big thing with Exponent, is you could share the URL. And I just want to give all the Exponent team huge props for everything they built to allow us to, have React Native under the covers and then add this layer of productivity and shareability of, these apps. So that's first pick. The second is something that's just hit GitHub a few weeks ago. It's called AWS SDK React Native, and it's from Amazon AWS Labs. And they have added S3, DynamoDB, Lambda, and SNS support in this SDK, which is a developer preview. They also rope in Amazon Cognito Identity, and I'm hoping to play with that in the next few weeks to see how that works in React Native. I assume it's going to be just as straightforward as using I've used the JavaScript API that they SDK that they provide. So I'm hoping the experience is similar. And last pick is a book that I am finishing up in the next day. It's called The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, and it's an absolutely fascinating read. It's not a boring book by any means. There's lots of stories that are interwove through it in real world ways of showing you that we all have habits, and habits aren't just personal. They're community habits, and companies have habits. So highly recommend reading that book. That's it.
Ali, do you have any picks?
I do, just one, but this project is kind of like a hack project that I loved it so much. It's called Web to Web. So one guy, I guess, I don't know if I can actually pronounce his name correctly or not, but he's actually created a project that makes your page and data serverless and domainless, which is pretty interesting. You don't need a physical server and you don't need a domain similar as a DNS. So what he did is he uses a torrent and blockchain, and then he connect these two in such a way that you can actually put your web page into the internet, which you don't have to actually pay anything. It always there, and nobody can actually bring it down. It's kind of like an interesting project. It's a very simple project, and I was actually very it was just tree files. If you just take a look at it, it's pretty simple. And I was actually amazed how people can actually create and be creative about this type of technologies.
That's awesome. How do you spell that? I'm kind of looking for it right now.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna. It's actually on the GitHub. So I'll push. I'll give you guys the link.
Okay. Yeah, we'll post the link then in our notes.
Yeah.
Okay. Tom, do you have any picks?
Yeah, 2 quick picks. One on the technical side. This past weekend, I got a chance to check out Apollo, and it's made by the same group that's behind Meteor, and I'm just amazed by it. It really gives an easy way to spin up a GraphQL server. I'm going to be working on writing a blog post, and I'm supposed to be speaking at the next Meteor Dev Shop in New York about it. So that's cool. Aside from that, I just finished this book yesterday called Open City by Teju Cole, Teju Cole, Cole. It's a really fascinating book. Was recommended to me by a friend. And if you're familiar with New York City, it's a guy originally from Nigeria who just kind of like different scenarios to New York City. I found it really a really great read.
Awesome. Yeah, I keep hearing good things about Apollo. I need to check it out. Okay. Yeah, I have a few picks. My first pick is actually a repo that Ali, who was on our show, he actually had something like this, and maybe he updated it, or maybe is the React Native WebView bridge the same WebView bridge you open sourced a few months ago, or is this a new bridge?
It's actually the same one, but I added a new feature into it.
Okay. Well, basically, it's React Native WebView bridge, and it allows you to interact with the WebView in React Native. And I've had quite a few people ask me about how to do this. I haven't actually needed to do it myself, but I've consulted and talked to a few people that needed something like this. So if you're listening, and you need to send events to and from your WebView bridge, to your WebView through React Native, check out that repo. And send some pull requests if you want to help out with it, right, Ali?
That would be amazing.
Also, 2 books. The first one is The Little Book of Talent, 52 Tips for Improving Your Skills by Daniel Coyle. It's about an hour and a half read, and it's one of the most jam-packed books I've ever read. So much information condensed into a very short amount of time, a very short time investment. It's really awesome. It just basically is about this guy who spent a lot of time studying very talented people, and he saw a lot of patterns, and he kind of documented those patterns, and it's a really cool read. Second is another book called Moneyball, and there's a movie about it, and I watched the movie and read the book this week. And I'm not even interested in baseball at all, but this would interest people that are also into statistics and into machine learning and things like that, because it's about basically how these guys kind of used data to become really good at scouting ball players before it was a thing. And it's the story about how that happened. And it's a really good book and a really good movie as well. And my last pick is a talk that was at React Next in Tel Aviv by Tal Cole. And it's called Building a React Native App for 80 Million Users. And it's one of the more interesting talks that I've heard in a long time about fundamentally why companies are gravitating towards React Native. And it's more of a fundamental talk than a technical talk. It is one of those talks where I felt like I got a lot out of it, and I got a very good perspective from a very large company about why they're using it. And that's my last pick. So with that, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up the show. That is episode 42 of React Native Radio. So thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you next week.